Okay, so good morning, everybody. Boker Tov.
Okay, so
Hope you all had a good break and a good Pesach, and it's good to be back learning again. Of course, slight technical difficulties on the morning, so you cannot see me, but you can hear me, and I promise I am here. So let's hopefully the video will be sorted out by tomorrow. I'm not sure what's going on, but let's go right back into it. So we're in the Gemara Makkot, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. That's where we left off. We're in the third Perek, Perek Elu Hein Halokin, and we were going through various rules regarding Makkot. Right? The general principles we've said is that for a lav, for a negative prohibition, for a lo ta'aseh shebatorah, the penalty would be Makkot. Again, in order for the penalty to be executed, there are a number of conditions. There needs to be azhara, meaning there needs to be the prohibition needs to be explicit in the Torah. Beyond that, there needs to be hatra'ah, meaning there needs to be warnings from two witnesses to the person who's about to commit the avera, and there needs to be acknowledgement of that hatra'ah, etc. We won't go into all the details. We've discussed it many times. And then we said, but that's the general principle for a lav. Of course, there are exceptions. You have a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh. For example, a negative prohibition which is a passive action. There is no active transgression taking place, no action which a person is performing. There is a lav shenitak la'aseh, which we've discussed at length, where a negative prohibition which is corrected, so to speak, by a positive one. For example, there's shivat ha'gzeilah. Somebody steals, but then they have a positive, it's a lo ta'aseh, you can't do it. But there is an aseh to go back and give back that which you've stolen, and therefore there would be no Makkot for the lav. We discussed at length Machloket Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. When would we say that even when you have a lav shenitak la'aseh, you would still get Makkot? Is it, you remember we discussed, is whether we say bitlo, lo bitlo, kimo, lo kimo, meaning if it's just that a person did not fulfill the mitzvat aseh, then they would already get lashes, or do we say only no, if they nullified the opportunity, the possibility to perform the mitzvat aseh? Okay, so we discussed some of those parameters. So we had in the Mishnayot, the first Mishnah in our Perek went through, it gave us a list. Obviously not an exhaustive list, not of all the mitzvot for which one would, for the averot for which one would get Makkot, but a number of them, and Rashi over there told us, and Tosfot as well, said that the Mishnah lists certain ones about which there is a chidush. There is some sort of novelty, and that's why these ones are listed. So our Mishnah here continues with the list of a number of different averot for which a number of lavim, for which one would get Makkot, and seemingly whether there is a certain element of chidush by each of these as well. So it says the Mishnah. So we're on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, about 6 lines down from the wide lines where the Mishnah begins, towards the end of the line. Ha'ochel bikurim ad shelo kara aleihem. Right. So here we begin a list. The Mishnah is going to say all of these things for which one would get Makkot. It's continuing the previous list. Later on, the Mishnah will say Harei ze lo kar ba'im. So the first one is ha'ochel bikurim ad shelo kara aleim. Somebody who eats bikurim when the kriya has not taken place. Right, the farmer brings his bikurim to the Beit HaMikdash. They are presented to the Kohen. There are a number of stages which have to be done. One is what's called kriya. One has to read the psukim of Arami Avedavi, which we all read over Pesach at Leil Seder. But this is where it comes from. It's in Parshat Ki Tavo. The person has to make that declaration, and the bikurim then have to be placed before the mizbeach, and then they're given over to the Kohen who can eat them. So if he was to eat the bikurim ad shelo kara aleihem, if he had not done the mikra bikurim, so then that would be one would get Makkot. We'll see in the Gemara. It's actually machloket. What is the stage which is ma'akev, which is the stage which prevents one from eating the bikurim? Is it specifically the kriya, or is it rather the hanacha, placing them before the mizbeach? But according to the Mishnah here, it is the kriya. So achel bikurim ad shelo kara aleim. That is one thing. Second thing, kodshei kodashim chutz liklaim, v'kodashim kalim u'maser sheni chutz lachoma. As I think we did discuss this once briefly, but we have the korbanot are divided into different categories. There's what's called kodshei kodashim and kodashim kalim. Kodshei kodashim can only be eaten within the Azara, within the Beit HaMikdash. The kodashim kalim have a lower level of sanctity. Those can be eaten outside as well, but they have to be eaten within the walls of Yerushalayim. So if one was to eat Kodashei Kodashim, either of these korbanot, outside of its designated area. So Kodashei Kodashim chutz laklaim. Klaim literally means the curtains. In the Mishkan, the different parts of the Mishkan were separated by curtains. Later on in the Mikdash, separated by walls, but nonetheless we still use the term klaim for both. Or Kodashim kalim u'maser sheni chutz lachoma. Or whether it is Kodashim kalim, right, or maser sheni, which is not a korban, but that needs to be eaten within the walls of Yerushalayim. So somebody ate those outside chutz lachoma, outside the walls of the city. That is one we get Makkot for as well. We've also mentioned in the past that the walls of the city, when you walk to Jaffa Gate today and you have the walls, those walls were built much later by Suleiman the Magnificent. Those are not the walls we are talking about, but we're talking about what is biblically the walls of the old city. Somebody who breaks a bone of the Korban Pesach. There's a love not to break a bone. And we've discussed this before. The Sefer HaChinuch tells us the reason why you have these mitzvot is that the Korban Pesach needed to be eaten in a sense of nobility, a sense of royalty. We're eating it like kings, like free people, not like hungry peasants who break their food because they can't wait to take another mouthful, another morsel. So somebody who would break here we're talking about the Korban, which is tahor, which you can eat. If you were to break the bone, you would get Malkot. Aval, continues the Mishnah, however, hamotir batahor, vashover batameh, eno lokeh ba'arbaim. But if one was to leave over, if one was to transgress the prohibition of notar by the Korban Pesach, right, even if it's tahor, or hashover batameh, or if one was to break a bone of a Korban which is tameh, then one would not get Malkot. Why no Malkot in these two cases? So Hamotir, we discussed at length previously in the Gemara, either because, right, and the Gemara actually gave three different reasons why it might be, depending on which opinion we follow. Might be because it is here a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh. There is no right motir. You're just leaving it over. You are passively transgressing. You're not actively doing anything to transgress that lav. Or because we might say it's a lav shenitak le'aseh. Remember the Torah says, don't leave anything over, but if you leave over, you should burn it. So it's a lav shenitak le'aseh. Or we discussed as well, might be a question of hatrat safek. So for any one or all of those reasons, there would be no Malkut. Yeah. Same thing regarding Hashover B'Tameh. If one was to break the bone where it is Tameh, so Rashi tells us Hashover Etzem B'Tameh Kedamrin B'Psachim Ve'Etzem Lo Tishpulu Bo. The pasuk says that when it says you cannot break a bone of the Korban Pesach, it says Etzem Lo Tishpulu Bo. Don't break a bone of it, referring to it, but Kasher V'Lo B'Pasul, talking about one which is Kasher, not one which is Pasul. Right, we've mentioned that there could be a situation, could be a scenario whereby the Korban Pesach could be eaten b'tumah, which is where the majority of the nation is in tumah, and therefore the Korban could be eaten b'tameh. But even there, Hashaveh b'tameh, they would not get eno lokeh arba'im. Okay, and then finally the Mishnah says, Hanotel ema ala banim. So this also the Gemara addressed previously, but regarding the mitzvah of shiluach haken. So somebody who takes the mother bird over the children, meaning the Torah says you have to send away the mother bird if you want to take the chicks or the eggs. If one was not to send away the mother bird, was to take the mother bird, that is a transgression. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer lokeh ve'eno meshalech. Rabbi Yehuda says you have therefore transgressed and you would get Malkot. V'chachamim omrim meshalech ve'eno lokeh. However, Chachamim say no. Chachamim say this would be a lav shenitak le'aseh. Because again, the pasuk tells us don't take the mother bird, but rather send it away. And the question was, what is the chronology of that pasuk? Right? We understand the pasuk is telling us lekatchila, send away the mother bird first, and then you can take the eggs or take the chicks. However, if you did not send away the mother bird and you took the mother bird first, is there now an aseh, which comes afterwards, to now send away the mother bird as a correction of that lav? Rabbi Yehuda says no, that's not what the pasuk is talking about. Chachamim say yes. Chachamim say yes, and this would be a lav shenitak le'aseh, and therefore there would be no Malkut. Okay, and then finally concludes the Mishnah ze aklal. Therefore, this is the principle. Kol mitzvat lo ta'aseh. sheyesh ba kumaseh en chayavin aleh. Any mitzvah lo taseh, any negative prohibition which has a kumaseh, in other words, a lav shenitak laseh, and chayavin aleh, one would not be chayav. There would not be Makkot, right? Except for the very limited exceptions which we have discussed. Okay. So says the Gemara. Now you'll notice the Mishnah does not mention, but at the end we have a machloket Rabbi Yudan Chachamim, but it does not mention at the beginning the name of any Tana. Right? It just said the first din in the Mishnah was Ha'ochel bikurim ad shelo kara aleim. Right? It says it's stam, and I mentioned that this is actually a machloket, whether one transgresses for eating bikurim, which have not had their kriya, have not had the mikra bikurim, have not had those psukim said over them, or whether it's if one were to eat the bikurim when they had not been placed in front of the mizbeach, which is the critical step. So our Mishnah says it's the mikra bikurim. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zo divrei Rabbi Akiva, stimta, v'chachamim omrim bikurim hanacha me'akevet bahen, kra en me'akevet bahen. Okay, so says the Gemara, Rabbi Bachana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, this din, which is taught in the Mishnah, this is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, right? And it's taught stam in the name of Rabbi Akiva. How do you know? How do you know that it's Rabbi Akiva? It doesn't say Zo divrei Rabbi Akiva. So says the Gemara, it says Rashi, Zo divrei Rabbi Akiva, matnitin diktani bikurim kriya me'akva bu Rabbi Akiva. Right, this din which we learned in the Mishnah, that it's specifically the mikra bikurim which is going to be me'akev. How do we know that this is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? It says shaya ragil Rebbe listom dvarav b'mishnah bistam b'kama mekomot. Then in certain places, right, we know that when Rebbe edited the Mishnah, so very often he'll tell us who said, Rabbi Meir said this, Rabbi Yehuda said that, Rabbi Shimon said this, or he'll just say bistam. Over here, he said, Yaragil Rebbe listom dvarav b'mishnah bistam kama mekomot v'chashmiya le Rabbi Yochanan. And this is what Rabbi Yochanan learned from this. The idle Rabbi Akiva kriya me'akva bikurim. That this is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. I mean, those who explain, and Farshim explain what Rashi is telling us, it's indicating that we know that between Rabbi Akiva v'chaverav we paskin halacha like Rabbi Akiva. So sometimes, if you have the Mishnah and you say it was in the name of this Tana, it was the name of that Tana, so it makes it sound like it's a machloket. So because we paskin halacha like Rabbi Akiva, very often Rebbe just wanted to make it bistam, not to say this is divrei Rabbi Akiva, not to make it sound like there are different opinions, but to make it sound like this is stam, right? Halacha is like stam. You know, in the Shulchan Aruch, for example, we say stam v'yeshomrim, halacha kistam, right? So he says Rebbe was satam et Mishnah in order because that was the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and that was the way that the halacha follows, and that is why he left it that way. So therefore, says Rabbi Yochanan, we learn out from here that this is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. So machloket Rabbi Akiva and Chachamim is what is the critical stage of the bikurim. Rabbi Akiva says it is the mikra bikurim, and again in the Gemara, Chachamim omrim bikurim hanacha me'akevet bahen. It is the hanacha. It is the placing them in front of the mizbeach. That's what's going to be me'akev from eating. However, kriya and me'akevet bahen, but the reading is not. So it says Rashi here again, hanacha lifnei mizbeach, placing it before the mizbeach. Me'akevet bahen, that is what's going to be me'akev. The shinaba kla, the pasuk said twice, v'hinicho lifnei, etc. V'hinachto lefanai, etc. Right? It uses the word hanacha a number of times regarding the bikurim to emphasize this point. Okay. So it says so clearly there's machloket, right? Because we see what Chachamim say and we see what our Mishnah says. But Rabbi Yochanan says this is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Now says the Gemara, V'leima zo divrei Rabbi Shimon stimta. Right? Maybe why don't you say that this is the Rebbe here where he wrote the opinion stam, was writing the stam as the opinion not of Rabbi Akiva but of Rabbi Shimon. There are a number of places Rebbe was the satam in the Mishnah. It's not always Rabbi Akiva. Sometimes it's Rabbi Shimon. And why should we say that it should be Rabbi Shimon? Because we have an explicit braita that tells us this is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. So says I'll just back Rabbi Yochanan. Essentially, he says Hakamash Malan. This is what Rabbi Yochanan wanted to teach us. What Rabbi wanted to teach us. The Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Shimon Svirale. He says no. The fact that it was Stam, the fact that the Mishnah was written Stam, and we know that usually if Rabbi wrote it Stam, that is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. But over here is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. So rather than telling you Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Shimon, just by writing it Stam, that's in order for you to understand that Stam is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon as well. That they agree that it's the Mikra Bikurim that is going to be Makkot. So where do we see that Rabbi Shimon holds this way? My Rabbi Shimon, Titania. We have a Braita. Utrumat yadcha elu bikurim. Okay, we have a pasuk, and the Gemara now is going to go for the rest of this Amud, most of the next one as well. If you have a look on the side, it's in Dvarim Yud Bet Yud Zayin. The full pasuk is Lo tuchal lechol bisharecha ma'aseh degancha v'tiroshcha v'itzarecha uvkorot b'karcha v'tzomcha v'chol nedarecha asher tidor v'nidvotecha utrumat yadecha. Okay, this pasuk is telling us in the context of Maser Sheni and in the context of different korbanot, different things which have to be eaten within Yerushalayim. So the pasuk says, the Baraita now is going to pick it apart. We're going to go word by word in this pasuk and understand exactly what the chiddush is in each word and what it's referring to and why we need that extra limud. The Gemara is then going to go and it's going to give us a percha for all of them and say, well, actually, maybe we don't need to learn it from there. But essentially what the pasuk is telling us is the following. It says, Lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha. You will not be able to eat in your gates, i.e., all of the following produce or the following korbanot, you cannot eat where you are. You have to come to Yerushalayim and you have to eat them within the walls. What is it? So maaser degancha v'tiroshcha v'itzarecha, right? Your maaser is referring to maaser sheni. Uvchorot bekarcha v'tzonecha, the firstborn of your bakar and of your tzon. V'chol nedarecha asher tidor, and all the nedarim which you will make, which the vows and oaths which you take v'nidvotecha. Right? There is a difference between a neder and a nedava. It's dependent on whether the person says, I am taking a vow that I have to bring something to the Beit HaMikdash, or where the person says, this animal has to come to the Beit HaMikdash. Right? That's the difference between a neder and a nedava, but the results is the same. Utrumat yadecha. Okay, so all of these things, so there's the simple meaning of what it's referring to, which is Masar and Bechor and Neder and Nedava. But now we go through the Braita and we say these are actually indicating other things as well, which might not have been obvious. So this is the Braita of Rabbi Shimon and goes through. It says, My Rabbi Shimon Tatanya, Utrumat Yadecha. That's the end of the pasuk, right? Trumat Yadecha Eilu Bikurim. When it says Trumat Yadecha, what is it referring to? That is Bikurim. So Amar Rabbi Shimon, Ma Bazel Lamdeinu. He says, what is it coming to teach us? Again, remember, the opening of the pasuk was, Lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha, that you can't eat it within your walls. You have to bring it to Yerushalayim to eat. So if we say the pasuk says Trumat Yadecha and Bikurim, and it's coming to teach you that you have to bring Bikurim to Yerushalayim to be eaten, right? Amar Rabbi Shimon, Ma Bazel Lamdeinu, Im lochlan chutz lachoma, if it's coming to teach you that you cannot eat them chutz lachoma, that there is an isur to eat the bikurim outside of the walls of Yerushalayim. Well, he says kal v'chomer mimaser hakal. He says we don't need a pasuk to teach us that because we have a kal v'chomer. The kal v'chomer of bikurim is from maaser. The Gemara on this staff on this amud is going to go through a number of kal v'chomers which Rabbi Shimon is going to bring. It's not going to explain them. It's not going to explain why one is kal and why one is chamor. We're going to get to that on the next amud. But in any event, so if we accept for the moment that there is a kal v'chomer, so he says kal v'chomer mimaser hakal uma maser hakal ochlan chutz lachoma lokeh bikurim lo kol sheken, right? Just as if we say maser, which is more lenient, which is less severe than bikurim. But if you were to eat maaser outside of the walls, then you would get Makkot. So bikurim lo kol sheken. So kal v'chomer, then that would be the same thing Bikurim. So therefore, that is not the chiddush of the pasuk. So what is it coming to teach us? Ha'lo ba'katuv ela le'ochel mi-bikurim ad shelo kara alein shehu lo ken. Says Rabbi Shimon, rather the pasuk is coming to teach you that somebody who eats bikurim without having read upon them, without having done the mikra bikurim, that would be, for that one would get Makkot. So that's where we see there is the proof that Rabbi Shimon is the opinion that we saw in our Mishnah, which we explained is also the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that it's the mikra bikurim as opposed to the hanacha, which is makev. Again, the way he learns it is the pasuk talks about bikurim. The simple pshat of the pasuk seems to be to tell you that you can't eat it outside the walls. But you don't need a pasuk to tell you that you can't eat bikurim outside the walls, because we know that from a kal v'chomer. The kal v'chomer is that just as maaser cannot be eaten outside the walls when we get Makkot, so to bikurim one would also get Makkot for eating outside the walls. Okay, that is so far. Again, at this point, the Gemara now goes through a number of different kal v'chomers that Rabbi Shimon learns from this pasuk, but it doesn't quite explain why. That we're going to see on the next Talmud what the kal v'chomer is. Okay, so let's just see Rashi over here. Rashi tells us right, Trumat Yadecha Elu Bikurim. We're about 4 lines down the wide lines of Rashi. It says Trumat Yadecha Elu Bikurim Dichtiv V'lakach HaKohen HaTenem Mi Yadecha. Is explaining how can it be where it says Trumat Yadecha, that which you lift up in your hands. How is that referring to Bikurim? Because by Bikurim it also says Mi Yadecha. The Kohen will take the basket from your hands. And that's what it means. He says Im Laochel Bikurim Chutz Lachoma Leso. If you're going to say that, the simple meaning of the pasuk is what it sounds like, that it's about eating bikurim outside the walls, because it says that's precisely what the pasuk seems to indicate. So he says right? The same pasuk itself talks about maaser at the beginning of the pasuk. Once it tells you explicitly that maaser you cannot eat outside the walls, so then you can plug in the kal v'chomer. Ulakam mefarish my chomer the bikurim maaser. Right? Says Rashi later on. The Gemara will explain to us why do we say that it's considered that maaser is kal and bikurim is chomer. Okay. Ad shelo kara alein arami oved avi. Those are the psukim which we have to read. Right, this is one of the Yud-Gimel Midot, one of the principles of extrapolation of the Torah. It seems a little bit counterintuitive to us, but we say when something is superfluous, if you don't need it for the matter about which it's actually taught explicitly, it must be coming to teach you implicitly about something else. Right? What is that something else? So generally speaking, we have a tradition for, or the Chachamim, the Tanaim are able to extrapolate. Over here it says, and what is that inyan acher that we said that is ad shelo kara aleim? Okay, so that was the first thing. Now we're going to continue the Braita. Rabbi Shimon is going to learn a number of other kal v'chomers from us. So let's go back into the Gemara. Sure. Okay, so then the next part of the pasuk. So we're about 10 lines up from the bottom of the page. V'nidvotecha, right? The pasuk. We're kind of working our way backwards through the pasuk. You remember the pasuk said Maaser degancha v'tiroshcha v'tzarecha. It started off with Maaser, and we said from there we learn the kal v'chomer. Then it went on to b'chorot b'karecha v'tzonecha kol nadarecha shetido v'nidvotecha trumat yadecha. So we've discussed the last one, which was Trumat Yadecha, which we said was Bikurim. Now we work our way backwards. Now we say V'nidvotecha. What is that? So what is that referring to? Nidvotecha. Zot Todah Ushlamim. Right? Nidava in this context refers to certain types of korbanot, which are nidavot, which are somewhat voluntary. Right? Todah and shlamim. Shlamim is certainly a voluntary korban. Amar Rabbi Shimon. So again, says Rabbi Shimon, what is it coming to teach us? So So again, you'll say that the pasuk says that it's about you can't eat them outside the Chumah, you can't eat them outside Yerushalayim. Well, once again, kal v'chomer mima'aser. We have the same kal v'chomer from Maaser to Todah Shlamim. So therefore he says, Alo ba katuv ela leocher b'todah u'shlamim lifnei zrika shehu lokeh. So it's coming to teach you something else. Again, what is the something else? The something else is that with Todah and Shlamim, if one was to eat them, before Zrika, before the sprinkling of the blood, then one would get Makkot. Again, the understanding is that each one of these words and each one of these cases is brought in the pasuk for a specific reason. Once it's told you Lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha regarding Maaser, it didn't need to say anything else because we have a kal v'chomer. So for the fact that it includes Bikurim, says Rabbi Shimon, includes Bikurim to teach you that if you ate it without the Mikra Bikurim, you would get Makkot. It includes, it says Nitvotecha to include Todah and Shlamim. Why does it include Todah and Shlamim? If it's to teach you that you can't eat Todah and Shlamim outside the walls of Yerushalayim, we know that from the kal v'chomer. So what's it coming to teach you? That you can't eat them without Zrikat Adam. You can't eat them before Zrikat Adam. Therefore, that you would get Makkot. Again, says Rashi, Lifnei Zrika shehu lokeh, D'im eino inyan chutz lechuma, Tneu inyan lekach. Right, if it's not related to the matter that it's speaking about something else, which is before Zrikat Adam. Shezeu isur chamur she'ata yachol letito le'inyan. This is what the serious the transgression that it could be related to. Because there is no explicit command about this. It doesn't say anywhere in the language of an azhara. It doesn't say anywhere in the language of a lav that you cannot eat this korban before the Zrikat Adam, and therefore that's coming to be included here. This would therefore be the azhara, and that's why you would get Makkot for that, according to Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so again, Amar Rabbi Shimon, ma ba'zel lamdeinu, im lochlan chutz lachoma kal v'chom mimaaser, alo ba katuv ela lochel betodah u'bishlamim lifnei zrika shehu lokeh. Okay, moving our way backwards again in the pasuk further. It says bechorot, right? The pasuk said bechorot b'karcha v'tzonecha, the firstborn. What is that referring to? Zeh bechor. Okay, so it says bechorot. That's referring to the bechor. Bechor has to be brought to the Beit HaMikdash, has to be given to the Kohen. So Amar Rabbi Shimon, ma ba'zel lamdeinu, im lochlan chutz lachoma kal v'chomer mimaaser. So again, same kal v'chomer. Says Rabbi Shimon, why does the pasuk include bechor? If it's a teacher that you can't eat, the bechor can't be eaten outside the Beit HaMikdash, we already know that from Maaser, from kal v'chomer. So what if we say the same as we said before? Im lifnei zrika. So you'll say it's going to teach you that you cannot eat it before the zrikat hadam. Well, now he says kal v'chomer mitodah v'shlamim. Well, then we have another kal v'chomer from Todah and Shlamim, which we've just learned. Okay, so implicit here is that a bechor is considered more severe than both Maaser and Todah and Shlamim. Okay. So what is it coming to teach us? Halo ba katuv ela leocher min habechor afilu lachar zrika shehu lokeh. Okay, so it means that the pasuk is going to teach you that you cannot eat from the bechor. You, meaning a zar, meaning a non-kohen, cannot eat from the bechor even after zrikat adam. Then even then, that would also be Makkot. Right, so it says Rashi over here, 3 lines from the bottom. Afilu lachar zrika shehu lokeh, im zalhu, if he is a zar, meaning he is a non-kohen, she'en ha-bechor ne'achal ela kohanim, bechor can only be eaten by the kohanim. V'zoi azharato, and this is its azhara. Right? Again, all of these cases, if we're trying to indicate that one would get Makkot, so we said you cannot have Makkot without an azhara. And there is no explicit, if there is no explicit negative prohibition for these cases, there may be in other cases. Rashi points out that it's written as an asay, it's written in the positive form, but that's not enough. So if we don't have an azara meforeshet, we have to have an azara which is learnt out. So it's learnt out from these words in the pasuk. So it says Rashi, Makom acher aseyu, In another place where it talks about how and where the bechor should be eaten by the Kohen, that is in the positive. But over here, it's written in the negative, and that is our azhara. So again, our pasuk is talking all about seemingly. Our pasuk is talking just about eating these things outside of the walls, outside Chomot Yerushalayim. And what we're going through and learning is that it's correct for the first case, which it says that it would have been enough for the Torah if the Torah just said Lo tuchal lechol bisharecha full stop, and that was the end of the pasuk. So we would have learned, okay, the Torah says you cannot eat maaser sheni outside of Yerushalayim. Now we learn Bakal v'chomer. If you can't eat maaser sheni outside, so you certainly cannot eat bikurim outside, and you certainly cannot eat todan shlamim outside, and you certainly cannot eat bechorot or any of the korbanot outside. But why are all of those things mentioned in the Torah in that pasuk? So says Rabbi Shimon, each of those cases you learn a different azhara from the fact that it's written here. You learn out for bikurim the azhara that you cannot eat bikurim without mikra bikurim, and you'll get Makkot if you do. We then learned out that todan shlamim you cannot eat before zrikat adam. We then learned out that bechor cannot be eaten even after zrikat adam by somebody who's a zar, who's not a kohen. Okay, continuing in the pasuk. Then, because the Torah did not just say bechorot, it said bechorot b'karcha v'tzonecha. It would have been enough to just say bechorot. We know it's talking about the bechor. Why does it add in the words b'karcha v'tzonecha? So says the Gemara, b'karcha v'tzonecha, 6 lines from the bottom, or 7, b'karcha v'tzonecha zochatat v'asham. We're now dealing with different korbanot. This refers to the chatat and the asham. Chatat and asham are korbanot chova. These are Kodshei Kodashim. So Amar Rabbi Shimon, Ma bazel lamdeinu. What is it coming to teach us about the Chatat and the Asham? Im lochlan chutz lachoma kal v'choma mimaaser. If it's to teach you that you can't eat it outside Yerushalayim, well, that we already know that it's going to be a kal v'choma from Ma'aser. Im lifnei zrika, if it's to teach you Makkot for eating it before zrikat adam, well, that is a kal v'choma mitodah shlamim. Right? If you're going to say that even after Zrika, meaning that the Chatat and the Asham, which are eaten by the Kohanim, if you're going to say that it can't be eaten even after Zrikat Adam for a Zar, well, that we already know from a Kal V'chomer from Bechor. Kal V'chomer min Bechor. So what is it coming to include? Ha lo ba katuv ela leochel mechatat ve'asham afilu la'achar Zrika Okay, so Ad Kan, we've been speaking about Kodashim Kalim, which can't be eaten outside Yerushalayim. Here we're talking about Kodshei Kodashim, which can't be eaten even outside the Azara, even outside the Klaim. That needs to be eaten within the Beit HaMikdash, and that is what it's coming to teach you over here, and that is the extra Azara that we get, as we saw in our Mishnah. The case that somebody who eats Kodashim Kalim michutz la Kodshei Kodashim, chutz la Klaim, that one would get Malkut for that. Right. So again, Amar Rabbi Shimon Mazeh ba'lamdeinu im lochlan chutz la choma kal v'chomim mimaaser im lifnei zrika kal v'chomim mitodah v'shlamim im lachar zrika, right? If it would be for a zar, even after zrikat adam, so that's kal v'chomim. Let's cover me bechor. Sorry, did I skip? Sorry. I skipped. So I'm looking at the wrong place. Again, just going back. So we said, go back 7 lines from the top. So b'karcha v'tzonecha zochatat ve'asham. So we said, Amar Rabbi Shimon ma bazel lamdeinu im nochlan chutz lachoma. We said kal v'chomim mimaaser. Im lifnei zrika kal v'chomim mitodah shlamim. Lachar zrika kal v'chomim bechor. So halo ba katuv ela leochel mechatat ve'asham afilu lachar zrika chutz laklaim. That's what we learned from those words b'karcha v'tzonecha, that the chatat ve'asham can't be eaten outside the klaim, can't be eaten outside the mikdash. She'ulokan, one would get malkut. So then, okay, going forward now in the pasuk, there's another term which we did not extrapolate yet, where it says called nadarecha. So it says nadarecha. What does that relate to? So it says nadarecha zo olah. This is an olah, which the name itself means olah. It is entirely consumed on the mizbeach. It's completely burnt up. Nobody eats it. So Amar Rabbi Shimon ma bazel lamdeinu. think you can predict probably what the Gemara is going to say, right? We're going to use all the previous Kal V'chomer and see what the extra Chiddush is here. So he says, Amar Bisham Ma Ba'zel Lamdeinu. What do we learn regarding the Korban Olah? So Im Lo'chlan Chutz L'choma. If you're going to say you can't eat it outside the walls of Yerushalayim, well, that we know is a Kal V'chomer from Ma'aseh. Im Lifnei Zrika. If you're going to say you can't eat it before Zrikat Adam, well, that's a Kal V'chomer from Todan Shlamim. Im Lachal Zrika. If you're going to say it's after Zar can't eat it even after Zrika, that's Kal V'chomer from Bechor. Im Chutz L'klaim. If you're going to say, well, you can't eat it even outside, not just outside the walls of Yerushalayim, but you can't eat it outside the Mikdash. Well, we have a Kal V'chomer now from Chatat Ve'Hasham. That's the last thing we learned. So what is it coming to teach? Haloba Katuv, right over the Amud. Haloba Katuv Ela le'ochel min ha'olah le'achal zrika afilu bifnim shulokeh. Coming to teach you that for the Olah, even after Zrikat Adam, and even for a Kohen, and even within the Beit HaMikdash, even then one would get Makkot. One would get Makkot for eating from it. Says Rashi, top of the page, Lo ochel olah, afilu lachal zrika, v'afilu kohen, shehulokeh. Right, to come to teach you that even if it's a kohen and even if it's inside, nonetheless he would still get Makkot. But and this is the Azara. We haven't found an Azara for this previously. Azarat aseh ashkachan ba. We've only had it phrased in the positive. Be'alma v'achu b'nei Aaron. Right in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra tells us that Bnei Aaron will arrange the olah right on the mizbeach. It has to be completely consumed, hasn't been eaten. But here we found the azhara that if one were to eat it, then one would get malchut. Okay, so these are all the different, so 5 different limudim from Kal V'chomer, which Rabbi Shimon learns from the pasuk. And now says the Gemara, Marava, the Yelida imei Rabbi Shimon Teled, that Rava says that any mother should pray that she should have a child like Rabbi Shimon, somebody who knows how to expound, how to learn out the psukim in the way that Rabbi Shimon, we essentially are praising him for all of his extrapolation and the drashot which he gives. What we're going to do next, and we'll have to do this tomorrow, but the Gemara is then going to go through and say, really, because every single one of the Kal V'chomers that Rabbi Shimon gave, there's actually a Perek for. And we're going to refute them. But that we will carry on tomorrow. Ad kan for today. I hope you'll be able to see me tomorrow as well. Really good to be learning again with everybody. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Good day, everybody.
All right, thank you.